Welcome back. Objective 4.2, Asset Management. The most boring sounding security topic on the entire exam, and quietly one of the most important because you cannot defend what you cannot see, and most breaches start on assets the security team did not know existed. Picture this: mid-size manufacturer, quarterly external pen test. The tester finds an internet-facing development server with no patches in 2 years, default credentials on the database, and a copy of the production customer list sitting in a public folder. The security team is furious. They had no idea this server existed. The owner had left the company 18 months earlier. Nobody inherited the server. It was not in the CMDB. It was not on any inventory. It was not in any patching queue. It was, in every documented sense, an orphan. And that is exactly how the tester found it, because nobody else was looking. Anyone who has ever run a network discovery scan and watched the device count balloon past the asset list knows this feeling. Asset management is not a paperwork exercise. Asset management is the difference between a clean pen test and a 4-figure cost incident. This pattern shows up in the news every quarter. The unmonitored test server, the developer's VM from a project that ended 2 years ago, the camera the facilities team installed without telling IT, the marketing landing page hosted on an out-of-band domain. Every one of those is an asset, and every one of those needs an owner, a classification, and a disposal date. That is the whole framework. The exam asks scenario questions, and the right answer is almost always the one that names a missing lifecycle phase. The asset lifecycle has 4 phases: acquisition, assignment, monitoring, disposal. Each phase has its own security work, and the exam will hand you a scenario from any of the 4. Let me walk through them. Phase 1, acquisition and procurement. This is where security gets in front of the problem instead of cleaning up after it. A security review before purchase. Evaluate the vendor's controls, request a SOC 2 report, run them through your third-party risk questionnaire. Does the vendor have documented security practices? What does their patching cadence look like? Will they sign a data processing addendum? For software, evaluate the open source dependencies, the licensing, and the known CVEs in any third-party libraries. For cloud services, review the shared responsibility model. The exam loves the shared responsibility question. The cloud provider secures the cloud. You secure what is in the cloud. Misunderstand that line and you end up with a public S3 bucket. And supply chain risk, malicious hardware or software inserted at manufacturing or during shipping. The SolarWinds breach is the textbook supply chain example, where attackers compromised a software vendor's build pipeline and pushed malicious updates to thousands of customers. The acquisition phase is where you catch this with vendor due diligence, software bills of materials, code signing verification, and reproducible builds. Phase 2, assignment and accounting. Every asset gets an owner. The owner is a person or a team, accountable for security decisions, classification, access control, and proper disposal. The owner is not necessarily the user. A database might be owned by the DBA team, but used by hundreds of analysts. The owner is the one who signs off on a vulnerability exception, the one who decides classification, the one whose name is on the exception document when the auditor asks. If you have ever tried to remediate a vulnerability and discovered nobody on the planet will admit to owning the affected server, you understand why ownership is the foundation of asset management. Asset classification follows ownership. 4 common levels: public, no harm if disclosed, marketing materials, public website content, internal or private, limited harm, internal policies, org charts, confidential or sensitive, significant harm, customer PII, financial records, restricted or top secret, severe harm, trade secrets, national security data, labeling matters, physical labels on the device, digital labels in the metadata, both reflect classification. Handling requirements differ by classification: who can access, how it is stored, how it is transmitted. Restricted data does not move over an unencrypted email. Confidential data does not get copied to a personal USB drive. The classification drives the controls. And here is where most teams trip. The classification has to actually be applied, and the user has to actually know what classification their data is. A perfect classification policy that nobody uses is the same as no classification policy. Tagging at creation and labeling that travels with the data is the only way this works in practice. Phase 3. Monitoring and tracking. 2 parallel inventories. Hardware, every device, serial number, location, owner. Software, every application, version, license status. Asset enumeration is the active part. You scan the network, find what is actually there, compare it to what you think is there. If you have not done this exercise recently, brace yourself because the gap between the two is always bigger than expected. Tools, Nmap for discovery, Nessus for credentialed inventory, Microsoft Intune or Tanium for managed endpoints. The first time you run a credentialed enumeration in an environment that has never had one, you will find domain controllers nobody documented, file servers with 20-year-old shares, and printers with embedded web servers running on default passwords. That first scan is the most useful day of your year. Then there is the CMDB, Configuration Management Database. This is more than an asset list. The CMDB holds configuration items, called CIs, and the relationships between them. It tells you that this web server depends on that database, that this load balancer fronts those 3 application servers, that this VPN concentrator authenticates against that domain controller. The CMDB is what change management uses to assess impact before a change goes in. The CMDB is what incident response uses to identify affected systems quickly. A simple asset inventory is a list. A CMDB is a graph. Software licensing lives in the same lane. License compliance. Audit installed software against purchased licenses, because the auditor will eventually do this, and it is better if you find your gap first. Shadow IT, unauthorized software installed without IT's knowledge. The developer who installed a quote-unquote helpful tool that turned out to be a Trojan. The marketing team running an analytics platform on a corporate credit card. Shadow IT is both a security risk and a license compliance problem. Discovery scans flag it. The exam will ask about Shadow IT, and the answer is always that it is unauthorized and it is a risk because it is unmanaged. Phase 4. Disposal and decommissioning. This is the most heavily tested area in the entire objective, so I am going to slow down. You must know which sanitization method goes with which media type and which sensitivity level. The exam will hand you a scenario, classified government data on an HDD, and your job is to pick the right verb, clearing, purging, or destroying. Get this hierarchy in your head before you sit the exam because there will be at least 2 questions that hinge on it. 3 tiers of sanitization. Clearing is overwriting. Write zeros, ones, or random data over every sector. The data is gone for everyday recovery purposes. Good enough for reuse inside the organization with non-sensitive data. Purging is more thorough. Cryptographic erase or advanced overwrite. The data is gone, even from forensic recovery. This is what you do for reuse outside the organization. Destroying is physical. Shredding, incineration, disintegration. The media is no longer media. This is what you do for classified data, or any time the data is sensitive enough that you do not want any doubt. The hierarchy is, clearing is less than purging is less than destroying. Memorize that. The exam will give you a scenario and ask which level applies, and the right answer always tracks the sensitivity of the data. There is one more wrinkle. Logical sanitization, like clearing, only works while the drive is functioning. If the drive will not power on, you cannot overwrite it. The only sanitization method that works on a dead drive is physical destruction. So the answer to drive failed, will not boot, has confidential data on it, is always destroy. Not degauss it first because you cannot verify, just destroy. The exam may phrase this as a hardware failure scenario, overwriting in detail, old standards, DOD 5220.22M, 3-pass overwrite. Even older, Gutmann method, 35 passes, considered overkill by modern standards, and you will see it described that way. Current NIST guidance, SP 800-88, 1 pass of random data is sufficient for most modern hard drives. Read that sentence twice. 1 pass, the triple pass and 35 pass standards predate modern drive technology. The exam may give you Gutmann as an option to test whether you know it is excessive. Big trap. Overwriting does not work reliably on SSDs. Where leveling means the drive's controller silently moves data to different physical cells to distribute write cycles. When you write zeros to a logical block, the controller may or may not actually overwrite the original physical cell. Forensic recovery on SSDs is real. The answer for SSDs is cryptographic erase. Destroy the encryption key and the entire drive becomes unreadable in microseconds. Or use the ATA secure erase command, which the drive's firmware implements correctly. Or physical destruction. If a question describes an SSD and asks for sanitization, do not pick 3-pass overwrite. Pick crypto erase or physical destruction. DEGAUSSING. Powerful magnetic field that randomizes the magnetic domains on the media. Works on HDDs, magnetic tape, floppy disks. Does not work on SSDs, USB drives, optical media. Those are not magnetic. After degaussing a modern HDD, the servo tracks are destroyed and the drive is unusable, which is fine because you do not plan to use it. For highly sensitive data, degauss and then physically destroy. The exam loves the question, what should you use to sanitize an SSD? And degaussing is the wrong answer every single time. Physical destruction methods. Shredding. Industrial shredder reduces the media to small particles. Incineration. Burn it. Disintegration. Specialized equipment reduces the media to tiny fragments. Pulverizing, hammer or crush. Drilling or crushing. Physically damage drive platters or chips. For classified data on any media type, physical destruction is the gold standard. Certificate of destruction. Formal document issued by a third-party vendor confirming the media was destroyed. Includes description of media, quantity, serial numbers, destruction method, date, and witness signature. Required for regulated industries, healthcare under HIPAA, finance under PCI DSS, government under various frameworks, and personal data under GDPR. The certificate is your legal proof of compliance. If you have ever sat through a regulatory audit, you know exactly what document the auditor is going to ask for and exactly what their face will look like if you cannot produce it. Data retention policies tie everything together. How long do we keep this data? Based on legal, regulatory, and business requirements. HIPAA requires 6 years of medical records. PCI DSS requires 1 year of transaction logs. After the retention period expires, data must be properly disposed of using approved sanitization. And here is the trap. Legal hold suspends normal deletion policies when data is subject to litigation or investigation. Even if a record is past its retention date, a legal hold preserves it until the legal team releases the hold. Failure to honor a legal hold is called spoliation, and it is a serious legal problem. Automated systems should enforce retention. Do not rely on a human to remember to delete. Sanitization method selection. Let me give you the cheat sheet the exam will quiz on. Drive being reused internally with non-sensitive data, clearing, and overwrite. Drive being donated or sold with general data, purging. A thorough overwrite or cryptographic erase. Drive with classified or highly sensitive data being retired, physical destruction, shred it. Magnetic tape with confidential data, degauss and then physically destroy. SSD with sensitive data, cryptographic erase or physical destruction. Drive that failed and will not boot, physical destruction, because you cannot overwrite a brick. 2 final concepts the exam will spring on you. Asset enumeration is the active discovery of all assets on the network. The network scan, the passive listening, the credential audit. The output of enumeration is the input to your inventory, and the gap between the two is your shadow IT problem. And the CMDB once more because it is the centerpiece. The CMDB is not just a list of assets, it is a relationship graph. Asset inventories tell you what you have. The CMDB tells you how everything connects. When the question asks which one tracks relationships and supports change management, that is the CMDB. One more practical note that the exam will not ask, but your job will. Asset management is also where mergers and acquisitions go wrong. When your company buys another company, you inherit their assets, their inventory gaps, their orphans, and their disposal failures. The first thing the security team does in any acquisition is reconcile inventories, what they say they have, what is actually on the network, what the CMDB contains. If you ever find yourself in an integration project and you cannot get a clean asset list, know that you are not alone and that fixing the inventory is more important than any single tool deployment. Quick recap as a 4-step lifecycle checklist. 1. Acquisition. Security review before purchase. Vendor risk assessment. Shared responsibility for cloud. Watch supply chain risk. 2. Assignment. Owner assigned, classification labeled, handling rules documented. 3. Monitoring. Hardware inventory and software inventory both maintained. CMDB holds configuration items and their relationships. Active enumeration finds shadow IT. Software license compliance audited. 4. Disposal. Pick the right sanitization method for the media and the sensitivity. Clearing for internal reuse, purging for external reuse, destroying for classified. Crypto erase for SSDs, degauss for magnetic media, shred for everything sensitive. Get a certificate of destruction. Honor legal holds. Automate retention. That is Objective 4.2. The orphan asset that started this video is fixed by every step we just walked through. Owner assigned, classification labeled, in the inventory, in the CMDB, in the patching queue, on a retention schedule, with a defined disposal method. The whole point of asset management is that the orphan never exists in the first place. If you take one thing away, assets need owners, and classification drives controls. If you take two things away, disposal is heavily tested and the right method depends on media and sensitivity. Next up, Objective 4.3, Vulnerability Management. We are going to talk about the patch you missed and the CVSS score that should have warned you. See you there.